Welcome to Asian Like Me, presented by me, Dr. Sohee Jun, the podcast for the modern Asian woman redefining what it means to thrive. I've spent years navigating the complexities of culture, family expectations, and career ambitions. Here, we have real, unfiltered conversations with incredible women who are breaking barriers, charting their own paths, and owning their power. Together, we'll dive into the wins, the lessons, and the challenges we all face. And yeah, we'll laugh. We'll share stories and drop some actionable tips to help you crush it in your own way. This is your space to feel seen, heard, and inspired. Ready to rewrite the rules? Let's drop in. Hi, Angela.
Hi.
It is so lovely to see you and to be in conversation with you. And when you and I touched base about a year ago, I was like, this woman is so aligned and so electrified and just is about doing big stuff. So I'm really looking forward to diving deep today.
Oh, I so appreciate that. I felt the same thing. When you connect with people, even though it's been a long time, we just know, right? Like you have this connection and so many different things align. So I'm excited to just have a conversation.
We're going to unpack a lot. I want to start with because I feel there's so much going on in the world. You and I were just talking about this. It's
Yeah.
messy everywhere. What are you hopeful about these days? What gives you hope?
Oh, yes. I'm a very optimistic, hopeful person. Doesn't mean I don't have the messy middle. I have it often with two teenagers. But I am actually so hopeful. If you look at how we grew up, I grew up in Southern California versus where we are now, like just the representation, the technology, the people. Things look really messy. On a day-to-day basis, we're like, gosh, are we going completely backwards? What is happening with the world? But in reality, if you actually look at it, like where you are, if you can let go of the external things that you're trying to fix or upset about, which I totally am all on board with, there's a lot of injustice right now.
Mm-hmm.
But just kind of think back to what's available to us and the ability for us to shift that, even though sometimes it feels not. So I am hopeful that if we can maintain our energy, protect our energy, know what's ours, what's not ours, that I'm hopeful that we can continue to see these changes and not lose our momentum. And what I mean by that is in momentum in whatever you believe in and whatever you are standing for. Because as an Asian woman, when I was a young kid, we just didn't know what we didn't know, right? Things weren't possible and I think you were just unaware, right? And you just faced whatever you faced and you took care of whatever you took of. Now we're aware of everything and things are actually doing good in some areas.
Yeah.
And so we just have to keep staying strong. So I'm hopeful for the future because sometimes you talk about young people and, what's happening to them. And I totally understand that because I have two teenagers. But then I look at glimmers of when I talk to kids and how mature they are, what they're thinking, or where they're going. And I am hopeful, even though sometimes you doubt it, by looking at the media and talking and seeing what's happening. But I am hopeful. I have a son that's a senior. They think a little bit differently and we can learn a lot from them.
I agree. I'm also a what's working type of mindset person, and I see that in you as well, just from the moment we talked. And it's interesting because I do think there's so much good happening with the younger generations that often gets missed and doesn't get amplified. And I am a believer that the lens with which you look at things is what you focus on. And so for you, Angela, you wrote this amazing book, The Power of the Only, Owning Your Voice and Thriving in Any Environment. But beyond that, this whole thing that you just shared about your mindset and the way you look at life, how did that start for you? I'm very curious about when that started to form, that way of viewing life in a hopeful way.
Yeah, interesting. I think when I was young, I was always hopeful, but unaware. I think when I got into I've always been that optimistic person, but I was unaware. And then when you're in your 20s, probably even more unaware. I just was in this mode of getting things done, right?
Mm-hmm.
Achieving. And I think when it really started happening, the shift is probably in my 30s and 40s when I actually started unpacking for the first time. Wait, I do have struggles. Wait a minute, this is hard. Wait, that wasn't right. And instead of this veneer of, I'll just figure it out, I'll just do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that we honor the reality, but also live in the mindset of what's possible. And
Mhm.
so for me, I guess probably when I'm 30, and then probably after I became a mom, when I really started to unpack. Because even when I was a young mom, I was like, oh, everything's great. I could just read all the books and I'll just fix it and it'll be great.
Yeah.
And after I had my first child and I left the news business was the first time I really sat down and said, who am I? What do I stand for? And how do I want to show up in the world? And started looking at, wow, you mean I was just in automatic, go-go mode?
Yeah.
And the reason it's convoluted, I say that each 5 to 10 years, I think we unpack even more. I mean,
Yeah.
every day we unpack even more. So I don't ever think that the nuance I want to talk about the earlier comment is that we have to honor our current reality. And
Mhm.
so even though I see things with a positive mindset and all that, I think that's the difference that's shifted in the last 5 to 10 years is that it's not about, oh, I did it, you can do it too. It's
Yeah.
more about what is real and
Yeah.
then dealing with what is real, but not denying what is hard, what is challenging, what is not fair,
Yeah.
and I think that's what the nuance that I want to address. And in the book, I do that as well because it's like, okay, here's how you own your voice. Here's how you own your power. Here's how I did it. Here's how all these amazing people that I interviewed did it. But here's why you can't, or here's why you don't. And
Mm.
that helps you see the reality more clearly.
Mhm.
And then you can choose with agency what you choose to do or not do. I know
Mm.
it's a convoluted answer, but
No,
it's more
no.
about I wanted to bring that up because I don't want people to think that, oh, you just have an optimistic mindset and you go. I think that's the mindset I had in my 20s. If you would have interviewed me in my 20s, I'd be like, just figure it out, work hard, hustle. And now I'm like, no, some things don't work out. Some things aren't fair, but we have to honor that reality and do whatever we need to do anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece where you mentioned the unaware part, where it allows you to hyper focus on what can be fixed and what you can do to fix it. I'm wondering if what you meant by the unaware of maybe the challenges around you, so you just went and figured it out on your own. And by the way, I think that's really ingrained to the Asian culture. Being
Yeah.
an immigrant, and Angela, I don't know if you were born in the States, but it made me hustle really hard
Oh,
and get
yeah.
gritty and resourceful and lots of falling down, a lot of pain, and a lot of getting back up.
Yes. And so I think a lot of our strengths often come from our deepest challenges.
Yes, sister, say it again.
Yes, and then sometimes our deepest strengths create more challenges.
Let's talk about that. You said this, and I caught on to that. I'm like, "Ooh, that's different. Tell me more. Say more."
Okay. So, like I said, when I was younger, typical Asian American, I was born in Southern California,
Mhm.
born on the East Coast, but moved here when I was one. Typical immigrant child, Chinese American immigrants. My parents immigrated from Taiwan. So, a little bit of the scarcity mindset, a little bit parents loved you, but, traditional Asian background, don't be too loud, don't show up too much. And I always went against it. But when I was younger, I was a little bit more shy. I think in high school, I stepped into myself. But what I wanted to talk about is that all those things that I went to, whether it was, a little bit of racism, a little bit of hardships, a little bit of my parents saying, you can't do that, don't do that, the typical immigrant background, they were super supportive, but they didn't understand so much. So a lot of independence. I had to take care of a lot of things. I'm the oldest sister.
Oh,
I
that
totally, right? The eldest sister, Asian American immigrant story. My brother's 8 years younger. So there's a lot of that pressure. I know that a lot of Asian American women feel there's a lot of that pressure, the oldest daughter, do good. But so what I meant by your greatest challenges become your strengths. So when I was younger, right, the immigrant mentality, scarcity, speaking up for my parents, translating, showing up,
yeah.
being the independent woman helped me tackle anything in my career. None of that bothered me. I was like, oh, yeah, that doesn't work. I'll go another way. Oh, that doesn't work. I'll figure it out. And I was always a little bit more bold. And I think that's just the way I was. It wasn't the way I was raised. It was what I developed and what I
It's
created.
what you develop. That's the nuance piece. It's what you
Right.
developed because you had to.
Exactly, and I think the things I did in small doses, I think, like, entering a speech competition, showing up and getting validated, and I believe in small wins that built me up into who I am now. It's not an overnight thing. It's not like I just became confident and proud. It was these little things, but the nuance of how your challenges become your strengths, but your strengths can also become your weaknesses is when the latter half of your life. So I was super successful, right? Work, 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 do this thing, reach the top, have all these, read your bio, have all these things. I was a TV news anchor in Los Angeles.
A really
Uh,
successful one.
Oh, thank you. But, you do all the things that are on paper that look good.
Yeah.
And then you realize that if you don't actually recreate the pattern or redesign the vision that you want for your life at some point, what worked in the past will not continue to work in the future. So all my strong suits of pushing through anything, making sure that everyone's taken care of, no loose ends, did I make the right choice? Push, push, push is what is actually going to lead to more challenges in the future if you don't unpack where that came from. If you
Yeah.
don't unpack and see
Yeah.
how it's holding you back. And so I believe in the next phase of life, it's actually taking those challenges and honoring the past, right?
Mm.
But also honoring where are you now in your stage of life. And I think that's really important is that you have to honor each life stage for what it is. Who I was when I was 20 is not the same when I was a new mom and not the same as I am now as a midlife woman with two teenagers. And we
Mm.
have to recalibrate and honor where we're at and not use the same patterns that we learned of success to dictate whatever's next.
I think that's where people get the most stuck. Certainly, as I've coached women in the corporate world,
Yes.
it's the inability to flow with what's next, or just a lack of not knowing if they understand that they're on a what's next, not knowing what that looks like or how to get the help of how do I see my blind spots? How do I uncover what patterns I'm
Mhm.
deeply ingrained in? And I love what you said about unpacking that and honoring, like, really saying, "That was great, and there were some hard wins, there were some deep, hard experiences, and who I am now is formed of that, so how do I move forward in a way that honors you?" And that's what I'm hearing from what you're saying.
Yeah. Let me give you an example. So when I was 30 years old, so I was that type A personality in high school. I wanted to be like Connie Chung. Everything I
Me
did
too,
was
by the
to
way.
Oh, really? That's so
Yes, I
great.
obsessed over her, watched
Well,
her
because
every night.
there was not that many role models, and I
Mhm.
lived in Los Angeles, so she was on the local level, and then she went to the national level. So her name for a lot of people, not just Asian women, but a lot of women or women of color, she was kind of like the representation that you could see on screen.
Yeah.
When I became a TV news anchor, I don't think necessarily
Because
just
of
because.
her?
Oh, yes, because of her, but not just because I wanted to be on TV. I think I saw it as an outlet to be seen, to tell stories, and then I actually majored in communications, and that was my main goal. My number one goal was to be like Connie Chung. And I'll tell you something, I actually talked myself out of it, so this is where the inner barriers come in. I made it to Los Angeles, but the part in the middle is the messy part. So
Yes.
I majored in communications, and I ended up interning in advertising because everyone told me how hard it was, you wouldn't make any money. My mom's like, "Well, your face is flat. How are you gonna be on TV?" She didn't mean to. She was so supportive of everything I did. She was a great mother, but she was like, "Oh, it's so hard, da 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 da," and would
That's
say all these things
exactly.
about the negatives. I pivoted because subconsciously it was embedded. And then as I majored in communications, then you have young women reporters, and I write about this in my book that says, "Oh, it's so hard. It's not fair. This." And I was like,
Mhm.
as a young girl, like they talked me out of it too. And then you'd go interview with agents like, "Yeah, start a small market. You're not going to make any money." I'm like, and at every step, it was just like people were stopping you, stopping you, stopping you. And so after college, I didn't have a lot of money. And I'm like, you know what? I want to learn about everything. I need to make some money. So I went and worked in Hollywood. Not that that was easier, but I was fascinated with television and movies and just communication in general.
Yeah.
And so I got myself a job and I worked at the studio as an assistant, helping launch Entertainment Tonight China, but I was an assistant answering phones, doing all the Hollywood stuff. But I got to see everything from the
Mhm.
business side to the creative side, helping launch the show. And I got a really good view. And then 2 years into it, I realized if I don't do it now, I won't. And so I did
Mhm.
take a detour. I talked myself out of it and I majored in advertising. And that's what I thought I was going to do. I was going to work in advertising or entertainment advertising. I thought to myself, I was like 24 years old, and I go, if I don't do it now, I'm going to get comfortable either now or never. And that's when I went on my small market journey. I left everything behind and I worked, I drove 7 days a week. I worked at 5 days at Paramount, 2 days in Palm Springs. And I had to unwire myself because I knew I had talked myself out of it. And then I had to talk myself back into it and say, you know what? I'm going to go for it for 2 or 3 years. And then I just worked really hard in small markets.
Mm.
And I have a crazy story of how I ended up back in LA. That wasn't gonna happen. I was literally on my last contract in Bakersfield, and I almost didn't make it, and I went from Bakersfield to LA,
Oh,
and that
wow.
was a crazy story, and no one believed in me then either. They're like, "Oh, there's no openings in LA." And the last minute, the day before, I talk about it more in the book, but
Yeah.
about how you really do need to honor your own path and believe in yourself because sometimes people will say, it's not possible or there's no openings. Like my agent was like, oh, you can't just go from Bakersfield to Los Angeles. And I did, but it was a
You
really
can.
hard journey. It was a really hard journey, and I honor that. But that was all grit. That was all work. Push, 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 working 7 days a week, mornings.
Wow.
And now you need to create a new pattern, right? Because that got me to where I needed to be. And then you got to sustain that career.
Mhm.
And then at some point in your life, you're like, you know what? I've earned the credibility. I've earned the experience. I'm okay. And
Yeah.
then you have to create the new vision.
I am so interested in diving into what the new vision is for you. I wanna go back though because
I know. Sorry, we covered a lot of
no,
different things.
girl, Angela, like, she's
uh,
had a life and there's more to create and know about, and I'm insanely curious about you. It says you began speaking at 15 and you were the first Asian American woman to win Miss California National Teenager. So how does one go from being a little bit shy, and
yeah.
I imagine the typical teenager full of insecurities, to being like, "You know what? I'm gonna go for that time." That's the meat of the formation of
Yeah.
core confidence, what I call, like, core confidence. And so how did that happen for you? Where did
Yeah.
it
So
begin?
it's so interesting. I was really shy. I had a bowl cut. I didn't even have a bike. My parents wouldn't buy me a bike. I mean, come on. Like I'd wear like clothes from Taiwan that had like wrong translations on them. I was your typical, I'm very Chinese and I'm very Southern Californian. And I have all the Asian stories, my parents and all this stuff. And it's
I have
so
the bowl haircut too. This is why we're long lost sisters.
yeah, but we all have that in us, right? So the question is, how did I shift? So what's interesting is, so I would say I was kind of shy and nerdy probably up until maybe sixth grade. And then I think in seventh and eighth grade, I kind of just, I got contacts. I think I stepped into myself. And you know what the number one thing is? The English teacher said, you should enter the speech competition. And I was like,
Oh.
what?
Mm.
And I think I entered an Optimist Club speech competition and I loved it. It was like destiny, choice, or chance. And I was like, I can't do that. And she's like, yes, you can. And so I wrote like the speech and I didn't win the first time. I got like third place or something. And then I did it again every year. And then by eighth grade, I was like, oh, I totally can do this. And then I ran for student government. I was like class president. And it was very gradual. But this is what I mean by the small wins.
Yes.
I think I was conditioned to be, and my personality is my person. I think I probably did have a big personality in there, but it was a little bit suppressed because of my Asian upbringing. And if you don't see role models like you, or if no one's pushing you in that direction, you talk yourself out of it.
Yeah.
And then I think I always had that fire inside me. As soon as I saw Connie Chung, I knew I was going to do it, even if I was shy. I just felt like there was something brewing inside me that was bigger, that I felt like I had a responsibility
Mhm.
to show up in a different way.
Mhm.
And everywhere I went, I was the only, right? This is how the origin started. I was the only Asian girl in my neighborhood. I went to predominantly white school, even though I grew up in Southern California, suburbs of Los Angeles. And I just felt like the advocate for others. Like I could see, and that's the definition of an only. If you can see, feel, hear, and understand more and beyond what others do. And how
Mm.
do you show up fully for yourself and for others to bring everyone and to create the change or whatever impact you want to make? And so the
Mm.
onlys, Asian women are very onlys, not just depending on where you grew up,
Mhm.
but I think there's a lot of people that are onlys that are thinking differently. But going back to how it shifted, I think those small wins are really important. And I think looking back, people have asked me that question before, and I was like, oh, I don't know. But looking back, it was that teacher believing in me and saying that you should do this. And then it's the practice,
Yeah.
right? I did it. And then you got validated. Oh, this worked out. And I did it again.
Yeah.
Oh, that worked out. And I ran for student government. Oh, that worked out. And then it just became kind of my personality. And the reason I did pageants, believe it or not, is because I actually saw it on TV.
The
Remember when
power
pageants,
of the TV.
you know what? I'm just such a this is why I love communication. I love TV. You have to see it to feel it,
Yep.
feel something. And then if you got called to it, whatever it is, and you're never going to know if for some people it's music or you just see something and it just goes boom, right? Like it just lands. And if you get that feeling, you need to go after it a little bit and
That's
figure out
the
what that is.
feeling. Yes, I
There's a
just
feeling, it's undescribable. You could be a little kid, you could be 20, you could be in midlife, and you just get hit almost like a calling. And so I did. I remember, I don't know what pageants used to be on TV, but I was like, well, that looks cool. And they win money for scholarships and they get to do cool things. And as an Asian girl sitting at home with your parents are like, just study. Oh, it's fine. You don't have time for that. I don't have money for that.
never
There
would
was
I
just
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't do sports, I didn't play piano, I just studied and I was a latchkey kid and I watched TV, and it gave me a gateway to opportunity, and that's what I think I saw, and
Yeah.
so when I got a magazine in the back, it said, "Enter the, Miss California National Teenager Pageant, send away for an application." I go, "Mom, can I enter this?" She said, "What?" I go, "You can win scholarship money," and
That
so
got her
I
attention.
so it wasn't about, "I'm so cool, I wanna be in a pageant," it was a symbol of opportunity,
Yeah.
and so I sent away you had to mail for it, right? You had to get a letter, I came back, and I go, "Mom, it's only $50 to enter," and that's tight back then, we figured it out, and I go, "Can I?" They're like, "Okay, sure," and I entered, and then I had to go to Malibu, and I was the first time, and it was great, I was with, like, I don't know, 150 girls, from all over California, and there was evening gown, interview, and no bathing suit. I had made sure that it had no bathing suit comment, and scholarship and grades and things like that.
Yeah.
And so it was very wholesome, and it was just an amazing I had no idea I would win. I knew nothing about anything pageant, but you wanna hear another story? This is
Yes.
another secret to your future.
Always.
I, checked out a book that said how to win a pageant, and I locked myself in my room, and I read that book, and I followed it. Because who had money for coaching? I didn't My
Yeah.
parents didn't know anything.
No.
Now, the pageants are a little different. There's, like, pageant coaches, there's all these
There's
things,
coaches
dance
for everything.
everything's so elevated, but back then, it was so wholesome. I wanted to do something, I sent away for it, I asked my mom, I got the book, I read it, and then I just went on this journey, and I think that actually did validate me in a way because in my head, I thought, "Maybe I can win a little bit of money, and maybe I'll make the top 10." Because in
Mm.
my head, I thought, "No way would an Asian girl win."
Mhm. Mhm. And
Isn't
there
that
you are.
crazy? I actually thought that. I capped my success, and it wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't like I had low self-esteem or anything. I just said, "Well, that'd be great. There's a speech part. Maybe I'll win the speech part, and I'll meet a lot of cool girls." And, these girls, some of them were everyone was so wholesome and nice. There was a few that were kind of rich, had fabulous dresses, and
Yeah.
moms that, had followed them around the circuit, and I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I can't be like them, but maybe I'll make the top 10 and win, like, $500 or something."
We'll be back with our guest in just a moment. And first, I want to talk about a practice that is essential to staying the only in your field without burning out. We often think of power as something we exert out into the world. And real sustainable power actually starts with how we nourish ourselves when no one is watching. That's why I'm so aligned with Ever 10. Ever 10 isn't just my wellness brand, it's a movement that is rooted in the idea of coming back to yourself. In a world that constantly asks us to do more and be more, Ever 10 creates a space for you to do the opposite intentional nourishment. Whether it's through our thoughtfully crafted essentials like the Illuminate Clarity line or the focus on mind body alignment, every piece of the Ever 10 collection is designed to help you clear the noise and reconnect with your inner compass. I've actually integrated our products into my own ritual as well because it represents a standard I believe in quality without compromise. And when you choose Everten, you aren't looking for a quick fix. You're making a commitment to the longevity of your own spirit. Trust is the foundation of everything we do. So if you're ready to prioritize your own nourishment and show up more fully in your own life, I invite you to explore the collection. Visit Everten, EVRTEN.com. Now, let's get back to the conversation. Can we just talk about this? The limiting talk. So I always say words are super powerful because it forms your beliefs if you repeat them. And so the limiting beliefs in our own mind about what's possible, even though you were doing this bold act of defying, I say the word defying, but it really was in asking your parents for you to enter this pageant. And then even there, you're like, okay, well, maybe, fifth place or 10th place or whatever you had in mind. But people carry those limiting thoughts around all the time.
The interesting thing is you really have to take the action and do small things and have that change, because what if I didn't win? I might have still been fine. It might have taken me longer to break through my limiting beliefs,
Yeah.
but my limiting beliefs were broken because it turned out differently.
Yeah.
right? And so I think those early things, so you asked me how my psyche was formed when I was younger. I think it's
Mhm.
because of my speech competition. I think because I thought I had a limiting belief and I capped myself and then it happened.
Mhm.
And then I had the self-esteem. Then I was like, all right, now I'm going for it. And I think nothing could stop me at that point. And then that's what happens when you get older is now you realize, okay, great. That confidence is great, but now you got to couple it with reality a little bit. And so I think that's what happens. I think when we were younger, we just went for it, right? Now as a middle-aged woman, you're like, oh, there's some hard things that we have to deal with. And so that's
Angela,
why
let's reframe that. Yes, and
but that's why I say you have to honor your life stage
Mhm.
because I am still on this journey. So I do not have any limiting beliefs about what I believe is possible for myself, but I have a lot of limiting beliefs subconsciously in other areas of my life. And you can't master them all at once. You just have to be open. So now I am a completely different person than when I was a teenager and a completely different person when I was a TV news anchor on TV. I'm more grounded in reality and what's possible. But I do believe that's why I wrote The Power of the Only because about, gosh, it was like almost 6 years ago, 10 years ago, I sat down and I go, "Why do I feel like there's power in being the only and other people don't?"
Mhm.
And it's not that I'm better or that I am different, it's that whatever limiting beliefs, maybe they haven't tested them out or no one told them that it was okay or they haven't had the trials to really push forward. So I decided to think about what's the mindset shift and what are the tools that we need to shift that. And I spent 5 or 6 years interviewing all the onlys, right?
Mm.
Onlys in different fields, different backgrounds, different levels to get a sense of, well, I think this way. These are my principles. Do they match up? Right. And then backed it with research.
I mean, this is such a powerful flip on the such a common narrative. You and I know this. It's like, it's so hard. And I'll share that I think in my when I look back on my corporate trajectory and like the corner office, and I got it eventually, but I do think that I talked myself out of what beyond that was possible because I didn't see people like myself. Everywhere I looked in corporate America at that time, it was nobody that looked like me. So I think that there was a little bit of a limiting belief about what's possible. And I do think the path that I've been on is the more authentic path of who honoring me and who I am and my talents. And I just get curious every once in a while about what have I told myself about what's possible or what's not. And I think what I'm hearing you say is like in the basing both what's possible and reality is looking at what do you really care about? What's true priority from an aligned perspective, right? Because to me, when you think about what's possible, the whole I orient that way too. I'm like, of course it's possible. It's possible. It's possible. And then now I've used the muscle of calling down really what I want to put my energy into, which means, sure, it might be possible, but let me also anchor into what I really want to do and give based on
Yes.
energy, time, resources, who I am now, and all of that. So is that a
Yes. Okay, so that's why, when I felt that calling for the power of the only, I wanted people to feel that energy, but I
Mm,
also wanted to give them the roadmap. So the power of the only is owning your opportunity,
mhm.
right? Knowing that it's possible that you can, and owning your voice, owning your power, owning your communication, because I am a communication coach as to how you navigate it. But the most important one is how do we own our future? Is how do we move from survival to thriving? And when you move from survival to thriving, that's when you honor your life stages. That's when you have discernment. And that's when you get to create that vision. And so I think it's
Discernment. I love that
discernment.
word. Yeah.
I think it's so important. So, what you're talking about, and this can happen at any life stage, but great. So, yes, the first thing you have to own your opportunities, believe it's possible, own your voice, own your power. You're able to communicate and navigate any room and do all that. But the true level of success is really how we're going to own our future and the thriving part. And that's when you have the nuance and you get to decide, okay, what's working, what's not working? What do I want at this moment in my life? Right. And what is possible based on, a lot of these are what people call luxury beliefs, right? Luxury beliefs. When I was younger, my parents didn't have find your purpose, find your passion, what's your vision? They just worked. They went to work. My dad worked in a restaurant, my mom worked in insurance, but they passed that scarcity down to me. But they had to, right? That was part of their life. And I don't have to hold on to it. And I still have a lot of that scarcity. My kids don't have that scarcity. I think that's why we butt heads. It's a constant unwiring of my daily beliefs to know what's actually mine and what's deeply embedded into my culture and my
Sure.
past.
That is the path that I've been on too. Can I just share like how much
Yeah.
identifying what was my parents and what's mine and who I am now. What has my experience been that's distinctly different than what my parents told me about what it could be? They literally worked at 2, 3 jobs each because they had to. And so to your point, what's possible didn't exist. And
Yeah,
so
it
it was
wasn't even an option to have a coach or to talk about these things, it wasn't possible.
or
It's
to be a coach or to be an
yes,
author or to, do all of these things
yes.
that now we're breaking barriers in our own lifetime to make things different and more possible in a different way for our children, which I think they get the luxury of being anchored into authenticity quicker.
Oh, totally, and I actually and here's the next barrier that I have to break through as an Asian woman and a parent, is that right, that was our goal is I empower people to break through their survival mindset, but then when I see it kind of the extreme other way in my I was like, "Well, you need a little bit of hardship."
Right? A little
I
bit of
believe
grounding.
a little bit. I believe that, but then sometimes I think, "Why? Am I putting my burden of my Chinese culture?" And so I constantly walk this balance of and this is how you should honor your past and look forward to the future, but there's a lot of values in me that made me strong, that have made me have grit. It comes from the hardship, comes from the tenacity and all that, but some of that comes from a scarcity background. So all the
Mm.
good things that came from it came maybe from not a great place, and so can we put that into our kids that their goodness comes from a good place versus more scarcity. I don't know. And but yeah, the reason I'm saying that is that I see that struggle in motherhood right now is well, yes, I want to pass on all this opportunity to you, but also the parts that I worked hard for is the parts that created my personality and my tenacity and shaped who I am. And I want them to have a little bit of that, their own challenge to work through.
That used to keep me up at night a lot in terms of not that I wish struggle on anyone, but there is a certain part of struggle that forms the resilience, that forms the grit, that forms your ability to make it out of a paper bag. I used to say, drop me anywhere and I will survive,
Yes.
I will thrive. Like I'll find a way. And that type of grit, and I'm speaking very broadly here, is not, leading for the next generation of children. It's a different type of grit. It's much more like emotional, mental resilience that they're
Yes, and I think that we just have to make sure we're not passing our old I don't like to use that word trauma, even though I know it exists, it's real, but our old experiences onto them when it's not their reality,
right.
right? To check ourselves as, "Oh, that's my thing, it's not their thing."
Right.
But also bring back some of the old school values because I think, I talk my new talk is leadership in the age of AI besides the power of the only, and I feel like in this new phase, everything's too fast, too easy, too done.
Yep.
And it's a conversation we're gonna have to have, not just with our children, but the people in our workforce about are we going to skip a whole level of critical thinking? In the end, that's what we have is our connection and our energy and our presence, and that's cultivated over our own experiences.
Yeah, and that's what I share with my kids. You guys all have the tools. We do know about it exactly to what you said, and decide how it plays in your life. And I think that's the critical part. I said, look, but as of now or in the foreseeable future, AI won't, it's not, it can't replicate energy. And energy is our currency and the way that we pay attention and the way that we make decisions. And so I hear you. Okay, so with the book and all of the people that you researched, like what jumped for you in just talking to all of those amazing people?
Oh my gosh. That many of us, men, women, different people of color, we're more alike than we think, and we struggle with the same things.
Boom. I love that.
And at the core, because I've spent years coaching executives and entrepreneurs. And when I was a reporter, I've interviewed so many people, celebrities, big, small, all different professionals, and I had a job to do. But then when I started coaching individuals
Yeah.
and they started telling me, their realities and I could see in their inner barriers, I was like, wow, I kind of have not a formula, but like everyone's story is different, but yet it's the same. And at the core is, am I enough? Right? No matter how successful I meet so many successful people, their inner barriers are often the same. Developed differently, have different experiences, different stories, different personalities, but the core is the same. And so I think being a coach, I'm sure you see it as well, that
Mhm.
you realize that it's not super unique. And I've also done a lot of personal development where I sit in a lot of rooms where people share a lot of things. And I think it's so magical when you can see that, wow, I'm not the only one struggling. So when I was younger, I didn't know what I didn't know. Yeah, I locked myself in the room to read books and did everything on my own. And as you become a coach and really open to connection and to people, or if you become a manager or a leader, you realize that people struggle with the same things. And that gives you the empathy to support them. So with the book, that's why I wanted to put all these different walks of life. I have men, women, people of color, neurodivergent, entrepreneurs, filmmakers, because you see that they struggle maybe with something that you struggle with, and you can find that story and then how they overcame it. And so you can find it relatable. And it's actually in all my podcasts. The interviews, many of them came from my podcast over the last 5 years. So they're still, if you want to hear them in depth, they're on the Power of the Only online, full length podcasts of all these stories. And I could only put a few stories or one example. Each interview was like one example to prove one point or one research,
Yeah.
but there's so much more that each of those people gave me.
Oh, trust me, I saw the Connie Chung one, or there's several that I was like, "Oh, I gotta listen to them," and I will go back and do that, and I want all of our listeners to do that as well. Is that the biggest tie-through or the biggest message you wanted your readers of The Power of the Only to feel? That there is, while we are unique in our own ways, that there's more that connects us, even if it's through the challenges or the desire to be enough. What was that big kind of, I want to leave my reader with?
Yeah. Well, the main core message is that being an only is not a weakness, it's your greatest strength. And in this time when all these things are happening, a lot of times all my clients say they doubt themselves, right?
Mhm.
I see a lot of talented people, a lot of executives that they hold themselves back or they're breaking through something. They may come to me because they want to give a speech or their boss asked them to do something or they're going to be on a media interview or whatever it is to show up more fully. And I wanted them to be able to see their brilliance, that they already had everything they need to show
Mm,
up and shine, right? And that is the core message of my communication is you amplified. A lot of people will come and they go, "Oh, I heard your podcast. I wanna be like you, or I wanna be able to be like my founder or the boss or this." And I'm like, "No, you wanna be like you, but amplified."
mhm.
And so the goal of my book was almost the rallying cry, kind of the playbook for when you feel like you're the only one, you have to know that it is a strength and that you actually see, feel, and know beyond what others don't. And you need to show up fully so that you can create the change that the world needs and
Yeah.
then bring others along with you.
Mm,
And you realize that being the only may be lonely, but you're not alone.
I love that saying. It may be lonely, but you're not alone. You're not alone. Oh my gosh, that's just, I wanna put that on a T-shirt, Angela. Maybe you and I we should do a photo shoot with just a
Oh
T.
my god, I would well, and speaking specifically to your audience of Asian women, our Only runs really deep in different levels. So I wrote this book for all leaders of that felt like the only one in navigating spaces and creating, but for Asian women specifically, there's just so many rules and things that we have in our head that we create for ourselves that are come from our generations, our parents. And, I'm sure if your parents are still around, when you go back and they're still in my childhood home, Thanksgiving's coming up, they're coming over, you
Mhm.
go right back. Right? It's like
Into
I wrote a
role, like you're
book,
12 years
I'm a
old.
TV news anchor, none of that matters. You talk to any executive, any celebrity, those barriers, those things are still there. And the biggest thing we can do, and I write about it a lot, even though I didn't write this specifically for Asian women, there are so many stories in here. There's several Asian leaders in there, and as well as my story of honoring your past, right? And seeing it for what it is and stepping into the future. But there's so many things that are, as Asian women, that we struggle with that sometimes we don't have to.
Yeah.
But we
Well,
have to start with being aware and honoring it, and there's so much value that our culture brings us as well. It's not a negative thing.
yeah. I love the flip on that too. There are many strengths and things to draw from. So as you are thinking about you talked a lot about the future. What does that look like for you, Angela? What are you visioning? What are you trying to bring forward in this messy middle phase that we're in?
Yes, well, my son's about to go to college, so he's a senior, he's in college apps right now, but for me right now, I'm very conscious. I spent 5 years on this book
Yeah.
and, while I was working in communication coaching and I'm a keynote speaker and MC, so the next phase of life is really I had to write this book from my soul as a give to the world. My actual work is actually beyond that, is leadership, talking about showing up on the big stages, I believe is important. I didn't write an Asian American woman book isn't because I don't love my Asian American women, and a lot of these stories is because I felt that besides writing the book, being and sharing all these really personal, deep stories that I think we can relate to,
Mhm.
is that I needed to be on the shelf in the business and leadership section.
To get amplified for, everyone to see it.
Yes, and to be on that I think it's important. I'm, involved in several Asian organizations. I do different things. I'm speaking at different events. I am a communication leadership speaker, and I think the best thing I can do to move messages forward is to show up fully on whatever stage that needs to be,
Mm,
right? And so in the big room. So I think it's important for us to show up collectively for each other and be in the small rooms and have these discussions and real things of the challenges of what we go through that other people may not understand. But more importantly, we need to not be afraid to be the only and to pave the path and to stay strong, even if it feels hard at times, but only if we want to. That's the difference. In the olden days or whenever it was like, just do it no matter what, you have a responsibility.
yeah.
And many people felt like it was a burden. I feel like it's a conscious choice. You don't have to show up in every room and every situation because you're supposed to. It's consciously choosing where do I want to show up and where do I have the most impact
Yeah, and
and
I
what
think
can I do right now?
I know, and I think that calls into discernment here too. It's advocacy, it's agency, discernment, all of that tied together in making choices about what's next. And so your book, 5 years in the making, it's so powerful. I mean, it's in the title, The Power of the Only. I can't wait for people to read it and get their hands on how they do that for themselves. And Angela, I'm really curious, how would you define what it means to be a modern, a badass Asian female?
I love that. I really think is honoring our past and seeing all of our challenges and honoring the strength that it gave us. I think it's important. I think there's a lot of books out there about intergenerational trauma and all that. And I talk about that in the book, how it passes down. But I think to frame it in a different way, my ancestors, so much wisdom that there is to draw upon. And I think when you're an only one, depending on where you were raised, a lot of times we put away the Asianness, right? We hide it. I believe right now I am fully integrated. I am very Chinese. I've even started bringing back, all those Asian soups and healing modalities that my
And
mom used to put in
mahjong, do
front.
you play mahjong
I
too?
actually don't play mahjong, but that's kind of become mainstream and cultural, right? But
Yes.
I don't. But all those things that maybe used to shy away from, I kind of adopted Asianness. I felt really comfortable with who I am even in high school, but I just think that I've interviewed so many Asian women, and we all have a different journey of what that wise Asian woman looks like. Some people step into themselves when they're teenagers. Some people it doesn't happen until college. Some people it still hasn't happened. And so what I ask of Asian women is to really honor all your strengths and your weaknesses and to look back in your past and just to honor all parts of yourself because that's how you became the way you are. And instead of looking at it as like, my parents struggles or even my grandmother's is that all that strength and wisdom. And the last chapter of my book, I honor my grandmother. I'll share one thing. When I was little, I was embarrassed because she lived with us for a while,
Mhm.
and she used to walk the neighborhood and tap on herself, and, the old lady, like, walking through the
Yeah.
neighborhood, and as a nine-year-old, I'd be like, "Oh, it's so embarrassing." I am so sorry that I even thought that, right? And so those are the things throughout your life that I don't feel any of that anymore, and I wrote a whole tribute to her and her strength and her wisdom, escaping war, raising my parents, helping them escape to Taiwan, all the things. But I think going back through our lives, not just your own life, but also excavating your past is really important and honoring it and putting it as all the wisdom so it can feed you. So as an Asian woman, I think that's important. And not to shame yourself for it either. Not to say, like whatever you did when you were younger or what you hid or weren't honoring, but I think honoring our past is so important and bringing that forth and integrating it into the amazing personality that you are and not putting us all in one lump. All of us are very different.
Mhm.
You don't have to think like another Asian woman, you don't have to think like your parents, but putting it all together, all that ancient wisdom with your current knowledge and self-awareness about yourself, and really know that you have the power of the only that you can show up fully in that room, and it's all available to you.
Oh,
Even if
wow.
it is hard, even if it's unfair, right? Because now we know I'll tell you to be super honest, let's end this interview with some honesty. When The Power of the Only, I was like, "Yes, The Power of the Only." It came out at just the right time, and then the world kinda shifted, and The Power of the Only wasn't as strong as I thought it was, and I was like, "Oh god. How am I supposed to talk about the power of the only when the power of the only is not that strong?" And then I read parts of my book. The power of the only stands stronger than ever. It still stands in our current state. And whatever you're feeling, if you're feeling a little defeated or tired, it's okay. Take the rest you need. I've pulled back a little bit on some things, but I am still stronger than ever. And that's the whole point. Sometimes you have to pull back to be stronger than ever. But the power of the only still stands, the principles still stand despite what's happening in the world, and that's what we have to keep going with.
Yes, and keep going, sister, and talk about honor. It has been such an honor to share this time with you. Thank you for being in conversation with me.
Oh, I love it so much. Thank you.
I love the way that Angela defines what it means to be a modern Asian female. She talks about being fully integrated. And I also feel that I'm more integrated than I've ever been. So I definitely got really juiced up when she said that. And we talked about so much. She is a dynamo. And I offer you three questions that really jumped from the conversation with her. One of the things that we looked at and talked about is the perceived barriers. And so I invite you to think about a high stakes room that you occupy where you are the only. And if you stopped viewing your presence there as a lucky accident or a heavy burden, what is one specific only insight, whether it's a perspective, whether it's a connection or a question that only you can offer to the table? And taking that a little further, how will you intentionally share that insight this week? The other piece that we talked about is defaulting to a cultural script of doing the work and staying quiet, assuming that it'll eventually pay off. And so with Angela, we talked about being the quiet worker, that script that often has a low return in our current work environment. So, the question I invite you to reflect on is to identify one area in your career or life where you're currently playing it safe, where you're currently playing it quiet out of habit. And then, what's the actual cost of your silence? So, if you were to own your voice, which is Angela's third principle in her book, and you speak up with 10% more boldness today, what's the breakthrough that you're currently leaving on the table? Let's do some math, shall we? I bet you'll be astonished at the cost of staying silent. And last but not least, let's talk about shifting from scarcity to an amplified vision. Because one of the hardest shifts for the modern Asian woman, I've also had this as well, is moving away from the survival and scarcity mindset of our ancestors towards a limitless abundance mindset of our own making. So I want you to reflect on, if you were to remove the expectation to be perfect or appropriate and instead focused on being you amplified, what's one bold future goal that you would pursue that currently feels really big, really stretchy for someone like you? And what is one small tangible step that you can take in the next 48 hours to signal to yourself that you are ready to own that future? So I do hope that you take some time reflecting on these questions and really making some micro actions to do things differently to be the more amplified you. And I really do hope that you have enjoyed our conversation together. And as a reminder, Angela Chee's book is called The Power of the Only: Own Your Voice and Thrive in Any Environment. Until next time, be well.